Alright, so for example 4, we're going to evaluate the limit as x approaches negative infinity of numerator 12x plus 25 divided by the square root of 16x squared plus 100x plus 500. So this seems a little more advanced because it's a square root, but that's okay. We're going to follow the same steps to get the right answer. Step 1 is to determine the largest power in the denominator. Now we do have an x squared in the denominator, that is the biggest power, but again, like a previous example, there is a square root over top of that. So we have to couple the x squared with the square root to determine the largest power is the square root of x squared. Step 2 is to divide the numerator and denominator by this power. So I'm going to divide 12x plus 25 over the square root of x squared, and I'm going to divide the bottom as well. Now keep in mind that x is approaching negative infinity. That's going to come into play right now when we do some simplification. So here's the thing, how do you simplify square root of x squared? For the longest time, even as a math teacher, I thought it was just x. But after doing some research, I realized that sometimes it simplifies to something else. Again, notice that x is approaching negative infinity, so our x values are going to be negative. So here's the thing. The square root of x squared actually simplifies to negative x whenever x is less than 0. And here's why. Let's just choose a random number, x equals negative 9. Okay? So we're going to write out square root of x squared, and we're going to say that we're going to replace x with negative 9. So first we're going to square negative 9 to get 81, and then we're going to take the square root. Now notice something, we didn't get x back. X is negative 9. We got positive 9 back. We got the opposite of negative 9. In other words, we got negative 9 back. Well, negative 9 is just negative x. So we've just shown when x is negative 9, square root of x squared equals negative x. And that's going to be true for any negative number. Okay, so keep that in mind. You could play devil's advocate and say, oh, well, you're just going to get x back, right? Well, you don't get x back. You would get negative 9 back if square root of x squared simplified to x all the time. But when it's negative, you can't do that. You have to write it as negative x. Okay, so why did we say that? That's because this is going to simplify not to x, but negative x. And again, that's because x is approaching negative infinity, so x is going to be negative. So I'm going to replace square root of x squared with, you guessed it, negative x. That's something that took me a while to actually learn. I don't know if I remember ever learning that in school. Anyways, the bottom is going to stay the same because this square root is going to distribute into this square root. It's going to become one big square root like such. Okay, just remember the top, you have a negative x here. Alright, so now I'm going to distribute this x squared into each term in the numerator under the radical. So it's going to be 16x squared over x squared plus 100x over x squared plus 500 over x squared. So let's break each of these down now. 12x over negative x is going to give me negative 12. 25 over negative x is going to be minus 25 over x. 16x squared over x squared is just going to be 16. 100x over x squared is going to become 100 over x. And finally, this is going to stay the same. So now I've done step 3, which is to simplify. Now I can go to step 4, which is to evaluate the individual limits. So we can now plug in negative infinity in for x. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Every time there's an x, we're going to replace it with negative infinity. Okay, first off, let's see, 25 over negative infinity. So you're taking 25 and dividing by a really, really big negative number. It's going to approach 0. And again, just in case, make sure you watch my videos on the different rules for x approaching infinity for powers. For this particular rule, we are looking at this one. So this number up here doesn't matter. It actually could be c or anything, because basically what happens is you move it out front and you're multiplying by 0, so it's just going to turn to 0. Okay, so let's get back to our steps here. So the same thing for these on the bottom. 100 over negative infinity just become 0, and 500 over, that's going to be positive infinity, still going to become 0. So we're just going to simplify all this. It's going to become negative 12 on top and square root of 16 on the bottom. So square root of 16 is 4, negative 12 over 4 is negative 3. and that's going to be our limit value. So limit as x approaches negative infinity equals negative 3. I like to always show the original question at the end. So limit as x approaches negative infinity of 12x plus 25 all divided by the square root of 16x squared plus 100x plus 500 is equal to negative 3. Let's go ahead and take a look at the graph. Okay, so here's our graph. We're going to drag this point somewhere in the middle. Here's our function right here. We're going to go ahead and drag it to the left, and we're going to see that the y value that it's approaching is going to be negative 3. That's it for this example. If you have any other questions about it, let me know.